The 6 hours I can't remember, I lost 6 hours. Not to sleep, not to alcohol, not to anything I can explain. One moment I was standing in the fading Texas sunset, checking my tires on the side of the highway. The next moment the sky was black, filled with stars, and my truck was 100 meters away from where I had parked it. My hands had marks on them that were not there before. 3 small circles arranged in a perfect triangle, like someone had pressed something into my skin while I was somewhere else, somewhere I cannot remember. That night I encountered something on that empty stretch of road between the border and nowhere, and I believe with everything left in me that whatever it was has not finished with me yet. My name is Ramon Estrada. I've been driving trucks for 15 years, crossing back and forth between Mexico and Texas more times than I can count. I know every rest stop, every gas station, every stretch of highway where the police like to hide with their speed guns. I know which diners serve coffee strong enough to keep you awake through the devil's hours between 2 and 4 in the morning. I know the rhythms of the road the way a sailor knows the sea, and I am telling you this not because I want you to believe my story. I am telling you this because what happened to me could happen to anyone who drives these roads at night. And if my words can save even one person from stopping where they should not stop, from looking at what they should not look at, then maybe some good can come from the worst night of my life. It was a Thursday in late October. I had picked up a load in Monterey and spent most of the day crawling through the paperwork at the border crossing in El Paso. By the time I finally made it through customs and hit the open road on the American side, the sun was already starting its descent toward the flat horizon. My dashboard clock read 6:14 in the evening. The sky was that particular shade of orange and gold that only exists in the desert, the kind of light that makes everything look like it is on fire. Beautiful, I suppose, if you're in the mood to appreciate beauty. I was not. I had been behind the wheel for 10 hours. 6 of those hours had been without a single break. The inside of my cab smelled like stale coffee and old sweat, and the particular chemical odor of the air freshener dangling from my rearview mirror, a little green tree that had stopped being fresh about 3,000 miles ago. My back felt like someone had driven railroad spikes into my spine at regular intervals. My eyes burned from staring at the endless ribbon of asphalt, and there was a dull ache behind my temples that pulsed with each heartbeat. But the worst of it was my bladder. I needed to stop. I had needed to stop for the past hour, but there had been nowhere to pull over safely, and I had been telling myself that the next gas station was just a few more miles ahead. The radio was playing some late-night talk show, the kind that caters to truckers and night-shift workers and insomniacs. A man with a smooth voice was taking calls from listeners discussing topics that ranged from politics to sports to the occasional story about strange things people had seen on the road. I was not really listening, just letting the sound wash over me like background noise, something to fill the silence and keep me from falling asleep. Then a caller came on, a trucker like me, his voice shaking so badly that some words were hard to understand. He talked about missing time, about marks on his body, about a bus stop glowing white in the middle of nowhere. If you see it, he said, do not approach. That light is not made by humans. The line went dead before he could finish. The host laughed nervously and moved on. I changed the station and forgot about it within minutes. I wish I had listened more carefully. I wish I had remembered his warning before it was too late. Outside my windows, the landscape of West Texas stretched in every direction, flat and brown and empty. Scrub brush and dry grass and the occasional twisted mesquite tree. No houses, no people, just the highway cutting through the wilderness like a scar. The sun continued to sink and the shadows grew longer, and I found myself checking my mirrors more often than usual, though I could not have told you why. There was nothing behind me except the road I had already traveled. Nothing ahead except more of the same. That is when I saw the sign for the gas station. A blue and white rectangle promising fuel and food and restrooms just 2 miles ahead. I felt my shoulders relax slightly. 2 more miles. I could make it 2 more miles. My bladder was screaming at me, but I had endured worse. I pressed a little harder on the accelerator, eager to reach civilization, even if civilization was just a lonely outpost in the middle of nowhere. But when I crested the small rise and the gas station came into view, my stomach dropped. Red and blue lights were flashing in the parking lot. 2 police cruisers were parked at angles across the entrance, their light bars painting the concrete with alternating colors. Yellow tape had been strung between metal poles blocking the way in. The station itself looked normal enough, bright lights glowing in the windows of the convenience store pumps standing ready for customers who were not being allowed to approach. But it was closed. Whatever had happened there, whatever was happening there, the police had decided that no one was getting in or out. I slowed down as I approached, and one of the officers stepped into my lane holding up his hand. I brought the truck to a stop and rolled down my window. The officer was young, maybe mid-20s, with a face that had not yet learned to hide its expressions. He looked nervous or maybe tired. It was hard to tell in the failing light. "Station is closed," he said. "Next services are about 15 minutes up the road." I leaned out slightly, trying to see past him into the gas station lot. "What happened here?" I asked. "Robbery accident." He shook his head. "Just closed, sir. You will need to move along." Something about his tone bothered me. It was too flat, too rehearsed, as if he had been saying the same thing to every vehicle that passed, and had long since stopped thinking about what the words meant. I noticed that he was wearing sunglasses, even though the sun was almost down and the light was fading fast. Dark lenses that completely hid his eyes. His partner, standing a few feet away, was wearing the same thing. 2 cops in sunglasses at dusk, guarding an empty gas station with no apparent reason for its closure. Probably just standard procedure, I told myself. Maybe a chemical spill, maybe a crime scene they needed to preserve. There had to be a rational explanation. 15 minutes, he repeated. "Next station is 15 minutes ahead. You should go now." I wanted to argue. I wanted to ask more questions. But what would be the point? He was not going to tell me anything, and my bladder was not going to wait for me to solve whatever mystery was unfolding at this particular patch of asphalt. So I thanked him, rolled up my window, and pulled back onto the highway. In my rearview mirror, I watched the flashing lights grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely, swallowed by the distance and the gathering dark. 15 minutes. That was what he had said. But 15 minutes felt like an eternity when every bump in the road sent a jolt of pressure through my lower abdomen. I tried to distract myself by changing the radio station, but nothing seemed to help. The sun had set completely now, leaving only a thin band of purple on the western horizon, and a sky that was quickly filling with stars. The road ahead was empty, lit only by my headlights, which carved a tunnel of visibility through the absolute blackness that surrounded me. I made it maybe 5 minutes before I knew I was not going to last. There was no way I could hold it for another 10 minutes, let alone however long it would take to actually find the gas station and locate a restroom. I was going to have to pull over. I was going to have to stop on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere in the dark and take care of business the old-fashioned way. It was not the first time I had done it. Probably not the last. Part of the job when you spend your life on highways that stretch across empty country. I put on my turn signal even though there was no one else on the road to see it. Old habits. I eased the truck onto the shoulder, which was narrower than I would have liked, forcing me to position the vehicle close to the edge of a shallow drainage ditch that separated the highway from the open rangeland beyond. The engine idled for a moment as I sat there looking out at the darkness that pressed against my windows. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound except the low rumble of my diesel engine and the distant chirping of insects hidden somewhere in the brush. I grabbed my tire pressure gauge from the door pocket. It was a heavy metal tool shaped something like a small baseball bat, the kind of thing that could serve as a weapon if I ever needed one. I had never needed one, But on nights like this, alone in the dark, I liked having something solid in my hand. I climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder, and walked around to the back of the truck, putting the vehicle between myself and the highway. If anyone drove past, they would see a trucker checking his tires. Nothing unusual, nothing worth stopping for. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. I stood there in the darkness, listening to the sound of my own breathing, feeling the tension drain out of my body along with everything else. The stars overhead were incredible, brighter than I had ever seen them, the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light. There was no moon, just that endless canopy of distant suns, and for a moment I felt very small and very alone, a single human standing on the edge of an infinite universe. That is when I heard it. Or rather, that is when I noticed the silence. The insects had stopped chirping. The wind, which had been blowing gently through the dry grass, had died completely. Even the distant hum of the highway, that ambient noise that you stop noticing until it disappears, was gone. The world had become absolutely, perfectly, unnaturally quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hold your breath because even the sound of air moving in and out of your lungs feels like a violation. I finished what I was doing and zipped up, suddenly eager to get back in the cab. But when I turned around, I was not alone. He was standing there maybe 10 feet away between me and the front of my truck. A man, tall and thin, wearing a long coat that seemed ridiculous in the warm Texas night. His face was hidden in shadow, just a dark oval where features should have been, though I could not understand why, since there should have been enough starlight to see him clearly. He stood perfectly still, his arms at his sides like a mannequin that someone had placed there while I was not looking. I froze. My grip tightened on the tire gauge, and I felt my heart begin to hammer in my chest. Where had he come from? There had been no car, no sound of approaching footsteps, nothing to indicate that another human being was anywhere nearby. He had simply appeared as if he had materialized out of the darkness itself. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding strange and thin in the unnatural silence. "Can I help you with something?" He did not answer. He did not move. He just stood there facing me, though I could not tell if he was actually looking at me because I could not see his eyes. Could not see anything of his face at all. I took a step backward and he moved. His right hand came up slowly, reaching inside his coat, and in that moment I was absolutely certain he was going for a gun. I raised the tire gauge, ready to swing, ready to fight, ready to do whatever I had to do to survive. Every muscle in my body tensed. Every nerve was on fire. I had never been in a real fight in my life, but in that instant I was prepared to kill or be killed. His hand came out of the coat. He was holding something long and cylindrical. In the darkness it looked exactly like the barrel of a pistol. I almost swung. I almost attacked. But then he raised it higher and light exploded from the end of it. Not the flash of a gunshot. Not the harsh beam of an ordinary flashlight. This was something else entirely. Something that I have no words for even now, even after all the time I have spent trying to understand what happened. The light was white, but also blue cold and sterile, like the light in an operating room, but infinitely brighter. It did not just illuminate. It consumed. It poured over me like liquid, like I was being drowned in illumination, and I could not close my eyes, could not turn my head, could not do anything except stand there and be swallowed by it. There are some lights that reveal, and there are some lights that erase. This was the second kind. It did not help me see. It took my seeing away. It took everything away. The last thing I remember thinking before the light claimed me completely was that I had made a terrible mistake. I should never have stopped on this road. I should never have stepped out of my truck. And now it was too late to run. Then there was nothing. No light, no darkness, no sound, no sensation. Just an absence where I used to be. And when I came back, when awareness returned to me like a swimmer breaking the surface after being held underwater for too long, everything had changed. The first thing I became aware of was my own breathing. It came in shallow, ragged gasps, as if I had been holding my breath for a very long time and my lungs had forgotten how to work properly. Each inhale felt like trying to suck air through a wet cloth. Each exhale burned. I stood there wherever there was, just breathing, just existing, trying to remember who I was and how I had come to be in this place. The second thing I became aware of was the cold. Not the warmth of the Texas evening I remembered, but a chill that seemed to come from inside my bones rather than from the air around me. I was shivering, though I could not feel my arms or legs well enough to know if they were actually moving. My body felt distant, like a house I had lived in once but had not visited in years. The third thing I became aware of was the darkness. I opened my eyes, or perhaps they were already open and simply had not been processing what they saw. Above me, the sky blazed with stars, more stars than I had ever seen even on the clearest nights in the most remote stretches of highway. The Milky Way arced overhead like a brushstroke of luminous paint so bright and detailed that I could see individual clouds of cosmic dust within it. There was no moon. There was no light pollution on the horizon. There was only the ancient light of a billion distant suns falling on me from across the unimaginable vastness of space. I was standing. That realization came slowly filtering through the fog that filled my head. I was on my feet, not lying down, not sitting. Standing upright in the middle of nowhere as if I had been placed here like a chess piece on a board. My legs felt numb, tingling with the sensation of blood returning to tissues that had been compressed for too long. How long had I been standing? Minutes, hours, I could not tell. I tried to remember what had happened. There had been a man, a tall figure in a long coat, a light impossibly bright pouring over me like water. And then nothing. A gap in my memory as clean and absolute as if someone had taken scissors to the film of my life and cut out an entire scene. One moment I was there on the shoulder of the highway next to my truck. The next moment I was here, wherever here was, with no recollection of the transition. My mouth was impossibly dry. My tongue felt thick and clumsy, stuck to the roof of my mouth like a piece of old leather. I tried to swallow and could not. Tried to speak and produced only a rasping croak that sounded nothing like my own voice. The air had a strange smell to it, clean and sharp like the air after a thunderstorm, but without the humidity. Ozone, that is what ozone smells like. But there had been no storm. The sky was clear. Where was that smell coming from? I looked down at my hands. They were empty. The tire pressure gauge that I'd been gripping so tightly was gone. I did not remember dropping it. My palms were slick with cold sweat, and as I stared at them in the starlight, I noticed something else, something wrong. On my left forearm, just below the elbow, there were marks. 3 small circles each about the size of a pencil eraser arranged in a perfect equilateral triangle. The skin around them was slightly discolored, a faint purple that suggested bruising beneath the surface. I touched one of them with my fingertip. No pain, just a strange numbness, a deadness in the tissue that should not have been there. These marks had not existed an hour ago. I was certain of that. I would have noticed them when I rolled up my sleeves. I would have felt them being made. But I had not noticed. I had not felt anything, because I had not been here. I had been somewhere else, somewhere I could not remember, and someone or something had done this to me while I was gone. I checked my right arm. 2 more marks, these on the inside of my wrist, smaller than the others, but arranged in the same triangular pattern. I reached up to touch my neck, running my fingers along the skin behind my ear, and found a small raised bump that had not been there before. It was tender when I pressed it, and I jerked my hand away instinctively, not wanting to know what was under my skin, not wanting to think about how it had gotten there. I forced myself to take a deep breath, held it for a count of 4, and let it out slowly. Then another and another. I needed to figure out where I was and how to get back to my truck and get the hell away from this place. Standing here in the dark, feeling sorry for myself, would not help anything. I was in a field. Dry grass reached up to my knees, pale and dead in the starlight, swaying gently in a breeze I could barely feel. The ground beneath my feet was hard, packed earth. not the gravel shoulder of the highway where I had parked. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the horizon in every direction, looking for anything familiar. To the east, or what I thought was east, I could see a faint line of lights in the distance. Not city lights, just the occasional headlights of vehicles passing on what must have been the highway. The highway was far away, much farther than it should have been. I tried to calculate the distance. 100 meters more. It was hard to tell in the darkness with no reference points to judge scale. But I knew one thing for certain. I had not walked here. I had been standing next to my truck on the shoulder of the road, and now I was in the middle of a field at least a football field's length away from where I had started. I had no memory of moving, no memory of anything between the light and this moment. It was as if I had been picked up and set down again like a child moving a toy from one spot to another. That was when I saw my truck. It was not where I had left it. When I had pulled over, I had parked on the shoulder of the highway close to the drainage ditch with the nose of the truck pointing north. Now it was sitting in the field at least 50 meters from the road, angled in a completely different direction. The cab was facing west toward the place where the sun had set hours ago. Someone had moved it. Someone had taken my truck and driven it into the middle of nowhere and left it there like an abandoned toy. I stopped and just stared at it. The truck was dark, no headlights, no interior lights, no sign of life. It sat there in the starlight like a sleeping animal waiting, for what I did not know, for me maybe, for whatever was supposed to happen next. My first thought was theft. Someone had stolen my truck while I was unconscious and then abandoned it here for some reason. But that did not make sense either. Why would a thief drive the truck into a field and leave it? Why not take it to a chop shop or use it to haul away whatever cargo they thought might be in the trailer? And how had they moved it without the keys? The keys. I patted my pockets, frantically searching for the familiar weight of metal and plastic. My right pocket was empty. My left pocket was empty. The keys were gone. Whoever had moved the truck had taken them. Or I had dropped them somewhere during those missing hours. Either way, I was stranded. I had a truck I could not start in a field I did not remember entering, with marks on my body I could not explain. I started walking toward the truck again, faster now, almost running despite the weakness in my legs. I needed to get to the cab. I needed to see if my phone was still there, if my wallet was still there, if anything at all made sense anymore. The grass whipped against my shins as I pushed through it, and the sound of my own breathing filled my ears, harsh and ragged. I was maybe 20 meters away when the truck's headlights came on. I stopped so suddenly that I nearly fell forward. The lights blazed to life without warning, cutting through the darkness like twin suns, so bright after the dim starlight that I had to shield my eyes with my hand. For a moment I just stood there frozen, trying to understand what I was seeing. Trucks do not turn their lights on by themselves. Trucks need keys, need someone in the driver's seat, need a human hand to flip the switch. But I was still 20 meters away. I was not in the cab. I was not anywhere near the cab. Then the engine started. The sound was unmistakable. The deep, rumbling cough of a diesel engine turning over, catching, settling into a steady idle. I had heard that sound 10,000 times. I knew it the way I knew my own heartbeat. My truck was running. My truck, which I did not have the keys to, which I had not touched since before the light, was sitting in a field in the middle of Texas, with its engine running and its lights on. I should have run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around and flee, to put as much distance between myself and that truck as possible. But I could not move. I was rooted to the spot, held in place by a fear so profound that it had short-circuited my ability to act. I could only stand there and watch as the impossible continued to unfold before me. The truck lurched, the sound of gears engaging the grind of the transmission shifting into reverse, and then it began to move. Backward away from me, rolling slowly across the uneven ground with no one at the wheel. I could see the cab clearly in the glow of the dashboard lights. I could see the driver's seat. It was empty. The truck continued to roll backward, picking up speed, slightly widening the distance between us. I found my voice. "Stop!" I shouted. The word came out cracked and broken, barely louder than a whisper. I tried again. Stop louder this time, but still not loud enough. The truck did not stop. It kept rolling, kept retreating as if it was daring me to follow. So I followed. I do not know why. Maybe I thought I could catch it, could somehow climb into the cab and regain control. Maybe I was not thinking at all, just reacting, chasing after the only familiar thing in a world that had become completely alien. I ran toward the truck, my legs burning with the effort, my lungs struggling to pull in enough air. But no matter how fast I ran, the truck stayed the same distance ahead of me. It was matching my speed exactly, keeping that gap between us constant, as if it knew precisely how fast I could move and was adjusting accordingly. After maybe 30 seconds of this futile chase, the truck stopped. The engine continued to idle. The lights continued to blaze, but the vehicle itself went still. It sat there in the darkness, waiting. I stopped too, bent over with my hands on my knees, gasping for breath. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples, and there was a copper taste in my mouth that might have been blood or might have been fear. When I looked up, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. The cab was no longer empty. There was a shape in the driver's seat, a silhouette visible through the windshield backlit by the dashboard glow. It was not moving. It was just sitting there, hands on the wheelhead turned slightly in my direction, watching me. I could not see its face. I could not see any details at all. Just that dark shape, that presence, that thing that had not been there a moment ago. I stood up straight, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to call out, to demand to know who was there, what they wanted, why they were doing this to me. But the words would not come. My voice had abandoned me entirely, leaving me mute and helpless in the face of something I could not understand. The shape in the cab raised one hand, slowly, deliberately, and then it waved at me. A small wave, almost friendly, like a neighbor greeting me from across the street, like someone who knew me, like something that wanted me to know it was aware of my presence. Then the lights went out, the engine died, and I was alone in the darkness once more. I do not know how long I stood there after that. Time had stopped meaning anything. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to my terror, and the silence pressed against me from all sides like a physical weight. Eventually, I became aware that I was standing motionless in a field in the middle of the night, and that standing here forever was not an option. I needed to move. I needed to do something. The truck was still there, maybe 40 meters away now after its backward journey, dark and silent, showing no signs of the impossible activity I had just witnessed. I started walking toward it again, slowly this time, cautiously ready to run at the first sign of movement. With each step, I expected the lights to come on again, expected the engine to roar to life, expected that shape to reappear in the driver's seat. But nothing happened. The truck remained dark and still, and the only sound was the soft crunch of my boots on the dry grass. When I reached the cab, I stopped and just looked at it for a long moment. The driver's door was hanging open, which I had not noticed before. The interior was dark, but I could see enough by the starlight to confirm that the seat was empty. No shape. No presence, just the familiar contours of my workplace. The steering wheel and the dashboard and the seat that had molded itself to my body over years of long hauls. I reached out and touched the door handle. It was warm, not from the sun, which had been down for hours, but from something else. Some residual heat that had no source I could identify. I pulled the door open wider and climbed up into the cab, settling into the driver's seat with a sense of relief that was almost overwhelming. I was back. I was in my truck. Whatever else had happened, I had made it back to something familiar. The first thing I did was check the ignition. No keys. The slot was empty. I checked the cup holder, the door pocket, the space under the seat. Nothing. The keys were gone, truly gone, not just misplaced, but removed entirely. And yet, the truck had been running. I had heard it. I had seen the lights. I had watched it drive itself across a field with no one at the wheel and no keys in the ignition. I checked my other belongings. My wallet was in the center console where I always kept it. My phone was in the cup holder screen dark. My paperwork was in the folder on the passenger seat. Nothing seemed to be missing except the keys. Whoever or whatever had done this to me, they had not taken anything of value. They had only taken my time. And maybe something else, something I could not see or identify. Something that might still be inside me, planted there during those hours I could not remember. I picked up my phone and pressed the power button. The screen lit up, showing me the time, 12:15 a.m. I stared at those numbers for a long moment, trying to make them make sense. When I had pulled over, it had been 6:14 in the evening. That was more than 6 hours ago. 6 hours that I had no memory of. 6 hours during which I had been somewhere else doing something else with someone or something else. And now I was back with marks on my body and a gap in my mind and a truck that had moved itself and a phone that told me the impossible was true. 6 hours. Gone. Erased. Whatever had been done to me during that time was already finished. The marks on my arms were proof that something had happened, but I had no memory of it. No way to know what they had taken, what they had given, what they had changed. I was sitting in my truck in the middle of a field, and I was not the same person who had pulled over on the shoulder of the highway to check his tires. That person was gone. What was left was something else, something that contained pieces of the old Ramon Estrada, but also contained something new, something unknown, something I could not see or understand. I sat there in the dark cab of my truck, holding my phone, staring at the time, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Some basic assumption about the way the world worked had shattered into pieces that I knew I would never be able to put back together. I had always believed that there were rules, that reality operated according to principles that could be understood and predicted, that the strange stories people told about lights in the sky and missing time and encounters with things that were not human were just stories, products of imagination or mental illness or simple lies. I did not believe that anymore. That was when I noticed the sound. It was faint at first, so faint that I thought I might be imagining it. A low hum, barely audible, coming from somewhere outside the truck. I held my breath and listened, trying to locate the source. It was not coming from the engine, which was still dead. It was not coming from the highway, which was too far away for any vehicle noise to reach me. It was coming from above. I leaned forward and looked up through the windshield. The stars were still there, blazing in their millions, but some of them were moving. 3 points of light, brighter than the others, were tracing paths across the sky that no natural object could follow. They moved in formation, maintaining perfect distance from each other, stopping and starting and changing direction with a precision that defied physics. One of them would shoot forward, then stop dead. Another would drift to the side, then reverse course. The third would climb straight up, pause, and then descend at an angle that would have torn any human aircraft apart. I watched them for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The humming sound grew louder as they approached a deep vibration that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. It was not a mechanical sound. It was something else. Something that resonated with frequencies that human technology had never produced. Something that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. The radio caller's warning echoed in my mind. If you see a bus stop glowing white in the middle of nowhere, do not approach. That light is not made by humans. I looked away from the lights in the sky and scanned the horizon, searching for something I prayed I would not find. And there it was. To the west, maybe 200 meters away, a glow that had not been there before. White light, pure and steady, illuminating something that stood alone in the empty field. A structure, a shelter, a shape that looked from this distance exactly like a bus stop. But there were no bus routes out here. There were no shelters, no buildings, nothing but grass and sky and the lonely ribbon of highway. Whatever that thing was, it had not been there when I pulled over hours ago. It had appeared during my missing time, materialized out of nothing, and now it was waiting, glowing white, calling to me. I should start the truck. The thought cut through my fear like a knife. I should get out of here. But I did not have the keys. The truck could not start without the keys. I was trapped, stranded, and whatever was out there in that glowing structure knew it. I gripped the steering wheel, fighting the urge to open the door and step out into the night. My knuckles went white. My arms trembled with the effort of staying still, but something was pulling at me. Not physically, something deeper, something inside my head in the place where decisions are made before you know you are making them. It wanted me to go to that light. It wanted me to see what was waiting there. My hand moved to the door handle. I did not tell it to move. It moved on its own, my fingers wrapping around the cold metal, my wrist turning to release the latch. I watched it happen as if I was watching someone else, a passenger in my own body, a witness to my own actions. The door swung open. My legs pivoted, my feet found the running board, my body descended to the ground. And then I was walking. Walking toward the light. Walking toward whatever was waiting for me in that impossible structure in the middle of an empty Texas field. I did not know it then, but the 6 hours were already gone. Whatever had happened to me between the moment that first light hit and the moment I woke up in this field, it was already over. The marks on my arms were proof. But what was about to happen, this walk toward the glowing structure, this was something new. A second act in a play I had not auditioned for. A continuation of something that had begun the moment I decided to pull over on the side of the highway. My feet moved without my permission. Each step carried me closer to the light, and each step felt like a betrayal of everything I knew about my own body. I could feel my muscles working, could feel the impact of my boots on the hard ground, could feel the dry grass brushing against my jeans. But I was not the one giving the commands. Something else was operating the controls, steering me across that dark field like a remote-controlled toy. I tried to stop. I focused every ounce of willpower I possessed on the simple act of standing still. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I thought it might work. My stride faltered. My right foot hesitated in mid-air. But then the pull reasserted itself, stronger than before, and I lurched forward with renewed momentum. Whatever force had taken hold of me, it was not going to let a little thing like free will stand in its way. The white light grew brighter as I approached. It did not flicker or waver like firelight. It did not buzz or hum like electric light. It simply was steady and pure and absolute, casting no shadows because it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The structure it illuminated became clearer with each step. A rectangular shape, maybe 10 feet long and 8 feet wide, a roof supported by 4 posts. Open on all sides except the back, which was a solid wall. It looked exactly like a bus shelter, the kind you might find on any street corner in any city in America. Except this one was standing in the middle of an empty field in West Texas, miles from the nearest paved road, glowing with a light that did not belong to this world. I stopped at the threshold. Or rather, my body stopped. I was close enough now to see details that had been invisible from a distance. The posts supporting the roof were not made of wood or metal. They were made of something else, something that looked almost organic, like bone that had been polished to a high sheen. The roof itself was seamless, no joints or seams or fasteners visible anywhere, as if it had been grown rather than built. The floor was the same material as the posts, smooth and pale and faintly luminous, giving off its own subtle glow that merged with the brighter light from above. The light source was mounted in the center of the ceiling. A sphere roughly the size of a basketball emitting that pure white radiance without any visible mechanism. No bulb, no filament, no LED array. Just light pouring out of solid matter as if the laws of physics had been suspended within this small space. I stared at it, unable to look away, and I had the distinct impression that it was staring back, that the sphere was not just a light source but an eye, that something was watching me through that glowing orb, studying me, evaluating me, deciding what to do with me next. My feet carried me forward across the threshold into the shelter. The moment I stepped onto that smooth floor, I felt a change in the air. It was cooler inside, noticeably cooler, though there were no walls to block the warm Texas night. The smell was different too, clean, sterile, like the inside of a hospital or a laboratory. The ozone scent I had noticed earlier was stronger here, sharp enough to make my eyes water. I stood in the center of the structure and looked around. There was nothing else inside. No benches, no maps, no schedules posted on the walls. Just the floor and the posts and the roof and that watching eye of light above my head. A bus shelter with nothing to suggest that any bus had ever stopped here or ever would. A structure built for a purpose I could not comprehend by hands that were not human for reasons that I suspected I did not want to know. My control returned suddenly without warning. One moment I was a passenger. The next I was back in the driver's seat. I staggered, slightly caught off guard by the sudden weight of my own volition. I spun around looking for the exit, ready to run back across the field to my truck and get as far away from this place as possible. But my legs would not move. Not because something was controlling them this time. Because I had looked down at the floor and seen something that froze me in place with a terror more profound than anything I had experienced so far. The floor was transparent. Or rather, it had become transparent. What had looked like solid material moments ago was now clear as glass, and through it I could see the ground beneath the structure. Except it was not ground. It was a room. A chamber of some kind, filled with equipment I did not recognize, surfaces covered with instruments and displays and things that pulsed with soft-colored lights. And in the center of that chamber, lying on a flat surface that might have been a table or a bed or something else entirely, was a human figure. It took me a long moment to realize I was looking at myself. The figure was wearing my clothes, my jeans, my work shirt, my boots. It had my face, my build, my graying hair. It was lying perfectly still, arms at its sides, eyes closed like a body laid out for burial. But it was not dead. I could see the chest rising and falling with slow, regular breaths. I could see the subtle movements of eyes beneath closed lids as if the figure was dreaming. I was looking at myself unconscious, lying in a room that existed beneath a structure that should not exist. And I had no idea how that was possible. Because I was standing here. I was awake. I was aware. How could I also be down there? The answer came to me slowly rising from somewhere deep in my mind like a bubble floating up through dark water. This was not happening now. This was a memory. Something that had already happened during those 6 missing hours being shown to me through whatever technology or magic or nightmare logic governed this place. I was being given a glimpse of what had been done to me while I was gone. As I watched, figures moved into view around the table. Not human figures. They were tall, thin, with proportions that were subtly wrong. Their heads were too large for their bodies. Their limbs were too long, too jointed, bending in places where human limbs do not bend. Their skin, if it was skin, was gray and smooth, without hair or pores or any of the imperfections that mark living flesh. And their eyes, God help me, their eyes, black and enormous, taking up half their faces, reflecting the light without any warmth or recognition or anything I could identify as emotion. There were 3 of them. They moved around the table with practiced efficiency, reaching for instruments I could not identify, performing procedures I could not understand. One of them held something that looked like a wand with a glowing tip. It passed the wand over my body, my unconscious body, and wherever the light touched, the flesh seemed to ripple slightly, as if something beneath the surface was responding. Another held a device with multiple prongs which it pressed against my left arm, right where I had found the triangular marks. I watched my own flesh dimple under the pressure, watched a brief flash of light, watched the device withdraw, leaving 3 small circles in its wake. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pound on the transparent floor and demand they stop, demand they release me, demand answers to questions I did not even know how to ask. But I could not move, could not speak, could only stand there and watch as these things, these creatures, these beings from somewhere beyond my understanding did whatever they wanted to my helpless body. The third figure moved closer to my head. It was carrying something that looked almost like a syringe, but larger, with a needle that seemed to move on its own, twisting and probing like a living thing. The figure positioned the device behind my ear at the exact spot where I had felt that small bump earlier. And then it pressed forward, and I watched the needle disappear into my own skull, and even though I felt nothing, even though I was standing safely above this scene, from the past I felt my gorge rise and had to look away to keep from vomiting. When I looked back, the scene had changed. I was alone in the chamber now, still unconscious on the table, but the creatures were gone. Time must have passed, though I could not tell how much. The lights in the chamber had dimmed slightly, and my body was showing signs of consciousness returning. My fingers twitched. My eyes moved beneath their lids with greater urgency. And then slowly I watched myself sit up on the table and look around with an expression of complete bewilderment. The memory me did not seem to see the same things I was seeing. It looked around the chamber with confusion, but not terror, as if it was seeing something different, something less threatening. I watched it swing its legs off the table and stand up, wobbling slightly, catching itself on the edge of the surface. I watched it walk toward a wall that seemed to open as it approached, revealing a passage beyond. I watched it disappear into that passage, and then the floor beneath my feet went opaque again, and the vision was over. I stood there in the shelter, trembling, trying to process what I had just witnessed. They had taken me. They had laid me on a table and done things to my body and put something inside my head and then let me go, wiped my memory, sent me back into the world with no knowledge of what had happened. I was not the same person I had been before I pulled over on that highway. Something had been added, something had been changed, and I had no idea what it was or what it was for. The floor began to vibrate. It started as a subtle tremor, barely perceptible, like the feeling you get when a heavy truck passes by on a nearby road. But it grew quickly, intensifying with each passing second until the entire structure was shaking around me. The posts rattled in their foundations. The roof groaned with stress. The sphere of light above my head began to pulse, brightening and dimming in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. I tried to run. This time my legs obeyed, carrying me toward the open side of the shelter at full speed. But I had barely taken 2 steps when the floor tilted beneath me, throwing me off balance, sending me stumbling to my knees. The vibration had become a roar, a deep bass rumble that I felt in my bones more than heard with my ears. And under that roar I heard something else, a sound like air being displaced, a sound like something massive preparing to move. The shelter was rising. I could feel it in my stomach, that sickening lurch of sudden acceleration, the same feeling you get when an elevator starts climbing. The ground outside the structure was dropping away, or we were lifting away from it, and through the still open sides I could see the field receding beneath me. 10 feet, 20 feet, 50 feet. The dry grass became a brown smear, then a texture, then just a dark flatness lit by the stars above. This is not a shelter, I thought, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. This is a craft, this is a ship, and it is taking off with me inside it. I scrambled toward the edge, some desperate part of my brain convinced that I could jump, that I could somehow survive the fall, that anything was better than staying on this thing as it climbed higher into the night sky. But before I could reach the opening, something changed. A shimmer passed through the air at the boundary of the structure, a ripple of distortion like heat haze over summer asphalt, and suddenly there was a barrier there. Not solid, not visible. But when I reached out to push through, my hand met resistance, an invisible wall that held me inside as surely as any prison. I pounded on the barrier with my fists. I screamed words that I do not remember, profanity, and prayers and pleas for help that nobody could hear. The craft continued to rise, and through the transparent floor, I could see my truck shrinking to the size of a matchbox, then a speck, then nothing at all. The highway was a faint line of lights in the distance. The stars wheeled overhead as the craft tilted and adjusted its orientation. And then we were moving not just up but forward, accelerating with a smoothness that defied everything I knew about physics and motion and the fundamental laws of the universe. I stopped screaming. There was no point. No one was coming to save me. No one even knew I was here. I was alone on an alien craft rising above the Texas desert, heading toward a destination I could not guess, and there was nothing I could do about it. The helplessness was absolute. The terror had passed through its peak and come out the other side into a kind of numb resignation. Whatever was going to happen would happen. I had no more control over my fate than a leaf has over the wind. The craft leveled off at what must have been several thousand feet. Through the transparent floor, I could see the landscape spread out below me like a map. Roads and fields and the occasional cluster of lights marking small towns. In the distance, a larger glow that might have been El Paso, or might have been some other city I did not recognize. From up here, everything looked peaceful, normal. A world going about its business unaware that one of its inhabitants had been plucked from the surface and was now floating through the sky in something that should not exist. The sphere of light above my head pulsed brighter, and I felt a pressure in my skull, not painful exactly, but intense. Like something was pressing against the inside of my forehead, trying to get in, or trying to get out. I pressed my palms against my temples and squeezed my eyes shut, trying to resist whatever was happening, trying to keep my mind intact. But resistance was useless. The pressure increased, and with it came images. Not through my eyes, through somewhere else, through the place where thoughts are born and memories are stored. I saw flashes of things I did not understand, a vast dark space filled with points of light, a world with a red sun and mountains that touched the sky, figures moving through corridors that stretched for miles, a sound that was not a sound, a communication that bypassed language entirely and spoke directly to something deep in my brain. And then I saw myself. Not the memory of myself on the table, a different self, a self standing exactly where I was standing now, looking out at exactly what I was looking at, but wearing an expression I did not recognize. My face, but not my expression, my eyes, but not my thoughts. I was looking at a version of myself that had been changed, altered, remade into something that was not entirely human anymore. The vision lasted only a moment, and then it was gone. The pressure in my head eased. The sphere above me dimmed back to its steady glow, and I was left standing there, gasping, trying to understand what I had just experienced. They did something to me, I whispered to the empty air. They put something in my head. They changed me. There was no response. Of course there was no response. I was talking to myself, to the night, to the impossible situation I had found myself in. But I needed to say the words out loud. I needed to hear them to make them real, to acknowledge the truth that I had been trying to deny since I first saw those marks on my arms. I was not alone in my own body anymore. Something else was in there with me. Something that had been placed there by hands that were not human for purposes I could not comprehend. A passenger, an observer, a piece of technology so advanced that it might as well be magic. The craft began to descend. I felt the change in pressure, the subtle shift in the vibration that told me we were no longer climbing or cruising but dropping back toward the earth. Through the floor, I watched the ground rise up to meet us. Fields and roads and the familiar flat expanse of the Texas landscape. We were going down fast, faster than any conventional aircraft would dare, but there was no wind, no sense of falling. No physical sensation that matched what my eyes were telling me. The technology was so far beyond human capability that it made our most advanced machines look like toys. The craft slowed as it approached the ground. The sphere above my head pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and then the invisible barrier at the edge of the structure dissolved. I could feel the change immediately, the rush of warm Texas air replacing the sterile coolness of the craft's interior. We were hovering now, maybe 6 feet off the ground, directly above the same field where this nightmare had begun. I did not wait for an invitation. The moment the barrier dropped, I lunged for the edge of the structure and threw myself out into the night. I hit the ground hard, rolling through the dry grass, feeling sharp stems scratch at my face and hands, but I did not care. I was off the craft. I was on solid ground. I was free, or as free as I could be with whatever they had put inside my head. I scrambled to my feet and spun around, expecting to see the structure still hovering there, expecting those creatures to come flowing out of it like water from a pipe. But there was nothing. The craft was gone. The light was gone. The field was empty except for the grass and the stars and me standing there with my chest heaving and my mind reeling from everything I had experienced. How long I stood there I cannot say. Eventually I became aware of something in the distance. A familiar shape, a dark mass sitting in the field maybe 100 meters away. My truck. I started walking toward it, then running, my boots pounding against the hard earth, my lungs burning with the effort. The truck sat there in the darkness, silent and still, waiting for me like an old friend. When I reached it, I grabbed the door handle and pulled myself up into the cab, collapsing into the driver's seat with a sob of relief that came from somewhere deep in my chest. I was back. I was in my truck. Whatever else had happened, I had made it back. The dashboard clock still showed 12:15 a.m. Only minutes had passed since I had last been in this seat, though it felt like hours. I looked at the empty ignition slot, at the darkness outside the windows, at the vast empty field stretching away in every direction. The keys were still missing. I checked my pockets again, knowing it was useless, knowing they were gone. Without keys, the truck was just a metal shell. I was still stranded, still trapped. And somewhere above me or around me or inside me, something was still watching, still waiting. I gripped the steering wheel and stared out at the night. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be something I could do. I could walk to the highway, flagged on a passing car, get help. I could wait until morning, until someone came looking for me. I could try to hotwire the truck, though I had no idea how to do that, and the newer models had security systems that made it nearly impossible anyway. That was when I heard it. A thin, whistling sound, high and distant, coming from somewhere above. I looked up through the windshield, searching the star-filled sky for the source. Something was falling. A small object tumbling through the air, catching the starlight as it descended. It was coming down fast, aimed almost directly at me. I barely had time to flinch before it struck the hood of the truck with a sharp, metallic clang. For a long moment I just sat there, afraid to move. The sound echoed in the silence, fading slowly into nothing. Whatever had fallen, it was sitting on the hood of my truck, maybe 3 feet from the windshield. A small object glinting faintly in the darkness. I opened the door and stepped down onto the hard ground. My legs felt weak, unsteady, but they carried me around to the front of the truck. The object was resting in a slight depression where it had impacted the metal, surrounded by a spider web of tiny scratches. I reached out and picked it up, feeling its weight in my palm. My keys. My truck keys, with the little silver cross my wife had given me for our anniversary, with the worn leather fob that said "World's Best Dad," with the spare house key I kept on the ring just in case. These were my keys, the same keys that had been in my pocket when the light first took me, the same keys that had vanished along with 6 hours of my life. And they had just fallen out of the sky. I looked up again, searching for some sign of where they had come from. The sky was empty. No craft, no lights, no indication that anything unusual had ever been there. Just stars and darkness and the vast, indifferent silence of the universe. They gave them back, I whispered. They took them, and now they gave them back. But why? That was the question that echoed in my head as I stood there holding those keys. Why take them in the first place? Why return them now? What was the message, the meaning, the purpose behind this final act? The answer came to me slowly, settling into my mind like sediment drifting to the bottom of a still pond. They were showing me that they could take anything, anything at all. My keys, my time, my memories, my body. They could take whatever they wanted, keep it as long as they wanted, and give it back whenever they chose. The keys were not a gift. They were a reminder, a demonstration of absolute power and absolute control. And if they could take my keys, what else had they taken that I did not know about? What else might they return someday, falling out of a clear sky when I least expected it? Or worse, what might they have put inside me that they would never take back? I climbed into the truck, inserted the key into the ignition, and turned it. The engine started immediately smoothly, as if nothing unusual had ever happened. I pulled the gear shift into drive and pressed the accelerator, and this time the truck moved, rolling forward across the field toward the distant lights of the highway. I did not look back. I did not want to see if anything was watching me go. I just drove, eyes fixed on the road ahead, hands gripping the wheel. The field gave way to the shoulder of the highway, and then I was on asphalt again, surrounded by lane markers and mile posts and all the ordinary infrastructure of human civilization. I pressed the accelerator harder, pushing the truck up to speed, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that empty field. I drove through the rest of the night without stopping. Every time I saw a rest area or a gas station, I felt the urge to pull over, to stop, to get out and stand on solid ground and convince myself that I was really free. But I could not bring myself to do it. Stopping meant being vulnerable. Stopping meant giving them another chance to take me. So I kept driving, watching the miles tick by on my odometer, watching the sky slowly lighten from black to gray to the pale pink of approaching dawn. I reached El Paso just as the sun broke over the eastern horizon. The city materialized around me like a dream, becoming solid buildings and streets and people going about their morning routines. Normal life, ordinary existence, everything I had taken for granted before last night now revealed as fragile and precious and infinitely valuable. I did not go home, not yet. Instead, I drove to the emergency room of the nearest hospital and parked in the lot outside. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the entrance, trying to decide what I would say. How do you explain to a doctor that you were taken by something not human? How do you describe marks that appeared on your body during hours you cannot remember? How do you ask them to check for things that might have been implanted in your skull without sounding completely insane? In the end, I kept it simple. I told them I had blacked out on the side of the road and woken up with marks on my arms that I could not explain. I told them I was worried I might have been attacked while unconscious. I did not mention lights in the sky or crafts that should not exist, or creatures with black eyes and gray skin. Some truths are too heavy for emergency rooms. The doctor was young, probably just a few years out of medical school, with the kind of professionally concerned expression that they must teach in bedside manner class. She examined the marks on my arm, shining a pen light at them, pressing gently on the surrounding tissue. She checked behind my ear and found the small bump, frowning slightly as she palpated it. "These look like injection sites," she said, "or possibly some kind of suction marks. Have you been using any medical devices? Any alternative therapies?" I shook my head. "I do not know how I got them," I said. That was the truth as far as it went. She ordered blood tests and an X-ray of my skull. The blood tests came back normal. The X-ray showed nothing unusual, no foreign objects, no anomalies. Whatever they had put in my head, it was either too small to see or made of something that did not show up on human imaging technology. The doctor told me to follow up with my regular physician and sent me home with a pamphlet about the warning signs of stroke. I drove to my house as the morning turned to midday. My wife was in the kitchen when I walked through the door, and the look on her face when she saw me told me everything I needed to know about how I must have appeared. She asked what had happened, why I was so late, why I looked like I had not slept in days. I told her there had been trouble with the truck, that I had to wait for a tow, that everything was fine now. Lies. Easy lies that slipped off my tongue without effort. The truth would have frightened her, and I could not bear to see fear in her eyes when she looked at me. That night I stood in the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. The face looking back at me was the same face I had worn for 38 years, but something about it seemed different. The eyes, maybe. There was something behind them now, some awareness that had not been there before. I was not alone in my own head anymore. I could feel it, a presence lurking just below the surface of my thoughts, watching, waiting, recording everything I saw and heard and felt. I pulled up my sleeve and looked at the marks on my arm. They had already begun to fade, the purple discoloration giving way to a yellowish tinge that would eventually disappear entirely. But they would leave scars, faint, almost invisible, but there. Permanent reminders of the night I was taken. The weeks that followed were difficult. I could not sleep without dreaming of black eyes and white light, and the feeling of being examined like a specimen on a slide. I would wake at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, convinced that something was standing at the foot of my bed. I would check the locks on all the doors and windows, then check them again, then lie awake until dawn, wondering if locks could keep out something that could pull a man from the side of a highway and erase 6 hours of his life. I started researching. Late nights on the computer, searching for others who had experienced what I had experienced. I found them. Hundreds of them. Thousands. People from all over the world telling stories that sounded exactly like mine. Missing time, strange marks, memories of examination tables and instruments and beings that were not human. Most of them were dismissed as cranks or liars or mentally ill. But I knew the truth. I knew because I had been there. I knew because the scars on my arms proved it. I learned about the Marfa Lights, a phenomenon that had been reported in this part of Texas for over 100 years. Strange glowing orbs that appeared in the desert at night, moving in ways that defied explanation. Scientists had tried to study them, to explain them as car headlights or atmospheric reflections or swamp gas. But none of those explanations accounted for reports from the 1880s, long before cars or highways or any of the other supposed sources. The lights had been here before us. They would be here after us. And whatever was behind them had been taking people from these roads for longer than anyone wanted to admit. I still drive trucks. I do not know what else to do. It is the only work I know, the only life I have built. But I do not drive at night anymore. I do not stop on empty stretches of highway, no matter how badly I need to. I do not look up at the sky when I see lights that move in ways they should not move. And I keep something in my glove compartment now, something I never carried before. I am not going to tell you what it is, but if they ever come for me again, I will not go quietly. I'm telling you this story because you need to know. If you drive these roads, if you work these long hauls through the empty spaces between cities, you need to understand that you are not alone out there. There are things in the darkness that we do not understand. Things that watch us, study us, take us when it suits their purposes. Things that have been here longer than human civilization and will still be here when we are gone. If you see lights in the sky that move in ways no aircraft can move, do not watch them. Look away. Keep driving. If a stranger appears from nowhere on a dark roadside, do not engage, do not speak, do not stop. And if you ever see a structure glowing white in the middle of an empty field, a bus stop or a shelter in a place where no bus has ever run, get as far away as you can, as fast as you can. Because that light is not made by humans, and what waits inside it does not have your best interests at heart. I know this because I did not run. I stopped when I should have kept driving. I looked when I should have turned away, and now I carry something inside me that I did not ask for and cannot remove. Every night when I close my eyes, I see those black eyes staring back at me. Every morning when I wake up, I check my body for new marks. And sometimes in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, I hear a voice that is not my own whispering in a language I do not understand. They told me they would see me again soon. I do not know when. I do not know where. But I know they were not lying. They are still out there watching, waiting. And sooner or later they will come back for what they left inside me. I just hope I am ready when they do. So let me ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Have you ever lost time you could not account for? Have you ever woken up with marks on your body that were not there when you fell asleep? Have you ever seen lights in the sky that moved in ways that made no sense? If you have, you already know what I'm talking about. And if you have not, consider yourself lucky. But stay vigilant, stay aware, because they are out there. They have always been out there. And one night when you least expect it, when you think you are safe and alone on some empty stretch of highway, they might come for you too. Drive safe. Keep your eyes on the road. And whatever you do, do not stop for strangers in the dark.